Hey, I've got a story that'll leave you stunned. Buckle up, because this isn't your typical love gone wrong tale. It's a whirlwind of lies, betrayal, and one unforgettable wedding day disaster. What started as the perfect relationship turned into something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Emma and I had been living together for 2 years, and our wedding was just a few months away. Everything seemed perfect, or at least, I thought it was. We had built a life that everyone around us envied. Friends called us relationship goals, and even our families seemed to believe we were destined for a lifetime of happiness. That's why, when Emma dropped her bombshell, it felt like the ground beneath me shifted. It was a regular evening. We were sitting on the couch, her legs resting across mine, while we flipped through wedding venue photos on her laptop. I remember thinking how beautiful she looked in that moment, her hair falling over her shoulder as she laughed at a joke I'd made about the over-the-top decorations at one of the venues. Then, just like that, her expression changed. She closed the laptop and turned to face me, a serious look in her eyes. "Noah," she said, her voice soft, "I've been thinking. Now, I've learned that nothing good ever starts with those words." "Okay," I said cautiously. "There's something I want to talk to you about before the wedding," she continued, her tone almost rehearsed. "Something important." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" She took a deep breath, her eyes darting away before meeting mine again. "What if we take a week to explore?" I blinked. "Explore what?" "You know," she hesitated, then rushed through the rest like ripping off a Band-Aid. "Just a week to make sure we're ready for forever. No rules, no judgment. Just freedom." I stared at her, convinced I had misheard. "Freedom? What are you talking about?" She leaned forward, placing a hand on my arm like she was trying to reassure me. "I love you, Noah. I do. But don't you think it's smart to make sure we're not missing anything before we get married? A week to clear our heads, to be certain." Her words hit me like a slap. "Are you saying you want an open relationship? Right before the wedding?" "Not an open relationship," she said quickly. "Just a week. 7 days to explore, to test the waters. Think of it as insurance." Insurance. She was talking about our relationship, our future, like it was a business deal that needed contingencies. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Emma, we're about to get married. Isn't that commitment enough?" Her eyes softened, her expression turning almost pleading. "It's not about you. It's about me. I need to know, Noah, for both of us." I should have shut it down right there. I should have told her how absurd and disrespectful the idea was. But Emma had a way of making me feel like I was the unreasonable one, like I was the one who didn't understand. I took a deep breath, trying to process the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me. Anger, confusion, hurt. Finally, I said, "If this is what you need, fine. But I don't like it." Her face lit up with relief. "Thank you, Noah. You'll see. It'll make us stronger in the end." I nodded, but deep down, something in me cracked. The next day, Emma was practically bouncing with excitement as she made plans for her week of freedom. She assured me it wasn't about meeting other people. It was about finding clarity. I tried to believe her, tried to convince myself that this was just a strange phase she needed to go through. But as the week loomed closer, that pit in my stomach only grew deeper. When Emma's open week began, I tried to convince myself that everything would be fine. I kept replaying her words in my head, "This will make us stronger." But as the days unfolded, it became clear that her version of clarity was nothing like what I'd imagined. On Monday, she left the apartment in the early afternoon. She didn't say where she was going, only that she'd be back by dinner. Her tone was light, almost dismissive, like she didn't want me to ask any questions. "Don't wait up," she said with a smile, tossing her coat over her arm. I told myself not to worry. After all, this was her idea, and she'd promised it was just about exploring feelings. But when she came home that evening, it was almost 10 p.m., and she looked different. Her hair was slightly tousled, her cheeks flushed, and she had this distant, dreamy look in her eyes. "Had a good time?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Yeah," she said, kicking off her shoes. I needed that. She didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. But something felt wrong. By Tuesday, the cracks in her story started to show. She left the apartment mid-morning, claiming she was meeting Taylor, her best friend, for brunch. But later that day, I saw Taylor's Instagram story. She was on a work trip in Chicago. When Emma got home that evening, I asked her how brunch was. "Oh, it was great," she said, barely looking up from her phone. "Taylor and I had so much to talk about." I stared at her, my stomach churning. "Really? Taylor's in Chicago." Her head snapped up, her smile faltering for just a second before she laughed it off. "Oh, right. I meant I was texting her while I had brunch. I met up with, Lily from work." It was such a blatant lie that I didn't even respond. Instead, I just nodded, filing the moment away in my mind. Wednesday was the day everything became crystal clear. Emma had been glued to her phone all morning, typing away with this stupid grin on her face. I couldn't help but ask, "Who's so funny?" "Oh, just the girls," she said without looking up. I leaned over to peek at her screen, but she locked it before I could see anything. "Private conversations, huh?" I joked, though my tone was sharper than I intended. She shrugged. "Everyone deserves a little privacy, Noah." By now, the pit in my stomach had turned into a full-blown chasm. That evening, she left the apartment wearing a sleek black dress and a pair of heels I hadn't seen in months. "Dinner plans?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Work thing," she said, her voice breezy. She didn't get home until after midnight. Thursday was when I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I came home early from work and found the apartment empty. Emma hadn't mentioned any plans for the day, but when I walked into the living room, I noticed something strange. Her laptop was open on the coffee table, and a message notification flashed on the screen. It was from Jake. Jake was a coworker she'd mentioned a few times before. I'd met him once at a holiday party. He seemed nice enough, though a little too friendly for my liking. Curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked the notification. The messages weren't overtly explicit, but they were loaded with subtext. "Jake, today was amazing. You're incredible. Can't wait for the weekend." "Emma, me too. Let's keep this between us. Okay?" Winking face. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. They weren't talking about spreadsheets. That evening, I decided to test the waters. "How was work?" I asked when Emma came home. "Busy," she said, slipping off her shoes. "Jake kept me in meetings all day." I clenched my jaw. "Jake, huh? You two seem close." Her expression barely changed, but I caught the slightest twitch in her brow. "He's a good coworker, that's all." By Friday, the charade was unbearable. Emma left the apartment that morning with an overnight bag, claiming she was going to visit her cousin in the city. "She's having a rough time," she said. "I'll probably stay over tonight to keep her company." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course. Let me know if you need anything." That night, I watched the footage from the camera I discreetly set up in the living room earlier in the week. At around 6 p.m., Emma walked in with Jake. They sat on the couch, laughing and leaning into each other in a way that made my stomach turn. I couldn't watch anymore. She didn't come back until Saturday afternoon, acting like nothing had happened. "Cousin's doing much better," she said with a satisfied smile. I didn't say a word. The week Emma had insisted on wasn't about clarity or making sure we were ready for forever. It was a free pass for her to do whatever she wanted, without any regard for me. But I wasn't just going to let this slide. By the time Saturday rolled around, I wasn't just angry. I was determined. Emma thought she could fool me, play me for a fool, but she didn't know me as well as she thought. If she was going to betray me and stomp on everything we'd built, I was going to make sure she didn't walk away unscathed. I spent most of Saturday afternoon replaying the footage from the living room camera. It was painful to watch. Emma and Jake sat on our couch, laughing, talking, and touching in ways I hadn't seen her do with me in months. He leaned in close, whispering something that made her throw her head back in laughter. Then, she rested her hand on his knee, and my stomach churned. That was all I needed to confirm what I already knew. I copied the footage to a secure folder on my computer and added it to the screenshots I'd already saved of their messages. My plan wasn't just to confront Emma. I was preparing for the worst-case scenario. If this week of freedom was the tip of the iceberg, I needed proof to protect myself in case things spiraled out of control. On Sunday, Emma acted like everything was normal. She spent most of the day lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone and occasionally glancing over at me. "You're quiet today," she said, her tone light but probing. "Just tired," I replied, keeping my face neutral. She nodded, not pushing further. I could tell she was testing the waters, trying to gauge if I suspected anything. But I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of knowing she'd gotten to me. That night, while she was in the shower, I decided to take my investigation to the next level. I knew Emma wasn't just texting Jake. There had to be more. I installed a tracking app on her phone, a move I never thought I'd resort to, but desperate times called for desperate measures. The app would give me access to her location, messages, and even call logs. It wasn't about spying for the sake of it. It was about getting the truth she refused to give me. Monday marked the start of a new week, and Emma seemed in high spirits. "So, are you feeling better about everything?" she asked over breakfast, her voice casual but calculated. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "I think the week was enlightening." Her eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place. Relief? Maybe? Good. "I told you this would be good for us." I nodded, biting back the response I wanted to give. When she left for work that morning, I immediately checked the tracking app. Sure enough, she hadn't gone straight to the office. Her location pinged at a coffee shop across town, a place we'd never been to together. I pulled up the camera feed I'd set up in the living room, just in case she stopped by the apartment during the day. Sure enough, by noon, she was back, with Jake. They didn't stay long, but it was enough to solidify my suspicions. He handed her a small gift bag before leaving, and she hugged him tightly, her head resting on his shoulder. By Tuesday, my folder of evidence was growing. I had messages, photos, location data, and hours of video footage. Every time I added another piece to the puzzle, it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. But I knew I had to keep going. That afternoon, I logged into our shared bank account and noticed a few charges I didn't recognize. Dinners at fancy restaurants, a hotel room downtown. I knew Emma wasn't spending that money on me. I printed out the statements and added them to the growing pile of evidence. Wednesday was the turning point. Emma came home late, claiming she'd been stuck at work, but her location history told a different story. She'd spent most of the evening at the same hotel that had shown up on our bank statement. I confronted her casually, trying to see if she'd come clean. "Long day?" "Exhausting," she said, dropping her bag on the floor. "What did you work on?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second before launching into a rehearsed answer about spreadsheets and deadlines. It was so generic, so fake, that I almost laughed. Instead, I just nodded. "Sounds like you've been busy." Thursday, I decided to test her loyalty one last time. I told her I had to work late and wouldn't be home until midnight. I parked a few blocks away from the apartment and waited. Sure enough, Jake showed up around 8 p.m. I watched from the shadows as they entered the building, laughing and chatting like a couple of teenagers. I gave them an hour before heading up. When I opened the door, the apartment was dark, and they were nowhere to be seen. But I noticed Emma's coat and Jake's jacket on the back of the couch. I didn't call out or make a sound. Instead, I took a picture of the coats, quietly closed the door, and left. By Friday, my plan was in motion. I had all the evidence I needed, and I was ready to make my move. Emma came home that evening, her mood cheerful, like she hadn't spent the week betraying me. "Guess what?" she said, dropping her bag on the counter. "The week is officially over. I'm ready to focus on us now." I stared at her, my heart pounding with a mix of rage and resolve. "Yeah," I said. "Me too." She smiled, oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath the surface. The week of freedom was finally over, and Emma acted like everything was back to normal. She flitted around the apartment with an air of relief, humming as she made breakfast on Saturday morning, as if she hadn't spent the last 7 days trampling on my trust. "We're stronger now, don't you think?" she said, sliding a plate of scrambled eggs in front of me. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Sure, Emma." The words tasted bitter, but I knew I had to play along. I wasn't done gathering evidence, and I needed everything to appear picture-perfect if I wanted my plan to work. The following week was all about wedding prep. Emma threw herself into the details, scheduling final dress fittings, confirming with the caterer and obsessing over the playlist. She insisted on a romantic first dance song, Can't Help Falling in Love. The irony wasn't lost on me. By Wednesday, the countdown to the big day had begun. I'd taken time off work to focus on wedding stuff, though most of my time was spent preparing my legal case. I met with a lawyer on Thursday, showing them the pile of evidence I'd collected. Messages, photos, receipts, it was all there. Open and shut, the lawyer said, impressed. She'll walk away with nothing if this goes to court. That's the plan, I replied. Still, I wasn't ready to pull the trigger just yet. I wanted the reveal to be unforgettable. On Friday night, the day before the wedding, we hosted a small dinner with close friends and family. Emma was radiant, charming everyone in the room with her laughter and effortless charisma. Watching her, you'd never guess she was living a double life. Her sister, Lily, arrived late with her husband, Matt. I hadn't spent much time with Matt, but something about him always seemed off. He was one of those guys who tried too hard to be the center of attention, constantly cracking jokes that fell flat. Emma greeted him warmly, maybe a little too warmly. They hugged for what felt like an eternity, and when he whispered something in her ear, her cheeks flushed. I clenched my jaw, but said nothing. Matt's always been the life of the party, Emma said later, brushing off my unease when I mentioned their interaction. He's harmless. Sure, I thought, just like Jake. The wedding day arrived in a blur of activity. Emma was up at dawn, surrounded by her bridal party as they got their hair and makeup done. I kept to myself, going through the motions, knowing what was coming. You nervous? Emma asked when we crossed paths briefly before the ceremony. No, I said, smiling faintly. Are you? Not at all, she replied, leaning in to kiss my cheek. This is going to be the best day of our lives. I nodded, my stomach churning. The ceremony itself was beautiful, at least, that's what everyone told me. I barely remember it. Standing at the altar, watching Emma walk down the aisle, I felt numb. She looked stunning in her dress, her smile dazzling as she recited her vows. But all I could think about was the mountain of lies beneath her perfect exterior. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, the room erupted into cheers. Emma beamed as we kissed, her grip on my hand firm, like she was staking her claim. Forever, she whispered. I didn't respond. The banquet was a spectacle. Emma's attention to detail paid off. The decorations were flawless, the food was exquisite, and the dance floor was packed. Guests mingled, toasted, and celebrated, completely oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. I stayed by Emma's side for most of the evening, watching her interact with guests, laughing and chatting like she had no care in the world. But then, as the night wore on, she started to slip away. At first, it was little things, disappearing for a few minutes here and there, taking longer than usual in the restroom. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but then I saw her near the back of the banquet hall, talking to Matt. Their body language set off alarm bells. She was leaning in close, her hand brushing his arm, while he grinned down at her like she was the only person in the room. I told myself I was overthinking it. Matt was her sister's husband. It couldn't be what I thought, right? But when they disappeared through a side door together, my heart sank. I waited a moment, then followed. The hallway was quiet, the sound of music and laughter fading behind me. I spotted them at the end of the corridor, slipping into one of the private lounges reserved for staff. I crept closer, my pulse pounding in my ears. From inside the room, I heard muffled voices, laughter, and the sound of footsteps moving closer together. My hand shook as I reached for the door handle, knowing this was the moment everything would change. I pushed the door open. There they were, Emma and Matt, locked in an intimate embrace, so caught up in each other that they didn't notice me at first. When they finally saw me, their expressions froze. Emma's face drained of color, and Matt stumbled back like a guilty teenager. Noah, Emma stammered, her voice high-pitched. It's not what it looks like. I stared at them, my chest tight with anger and disgust. I think it's exactly what it looks like, I said, my voice cold. Time stood still as I stood in the doorway, staring at Emma and Matt. Her face was pale, her eyes wide like a deer caught in headlights. Matt, on the other hand, fumbled with his shirt collar, avoiding my gaze. "Noah, this isn't what it looks like," Emma blurted, her voice trembling with panic. I tilted my head, my lips curling into a bitter smile. "Isn't it? Because from here, it looks pretty damn clear." Matt stepped forward, raising his hands in a weak attempt to defuse the situation. "Noah, man, let's talk about this." "It's not." "Don't." I cut him off, my voice low and sharp. "Don't even try." Emma reached for me, her voice softening as she adopted her usual manipulative tone. "Noah, please, let's just go back to the banquet. We can talk about this later, in private. It's not what you think." I stepped back, letting her hand fall uselessly to her side. "Not what I think," I repeated, my tone dripping with sarcasm. "You're in here with your sister's husband, Emma. What part of this am I misunderstanding?" Her jaw opened and closed, but no words came out. Matt, looking like he wished he could disappear, muttered something about needing to check on Lily and bolted out of the room. Coward. I turned my gaze back to Emma, who was now clutching her arms, trying to appear small and vulnerable. It was her usual play. Make herself the victim, shift the blame. But not this time. "Let's go," I said, my voice steady. "Go where?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "To the banquet," I said, turning toward the hallway. "I think it's time we made an announcement." The banquet hall was alive with laughter and music as we stepped back inside. Emma trailed behind me, her steps hesitant, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal searching for an escape. I walked straight to the stage, grabbing the microphone from the DJ. The music cut off, and the room fell silent as every head turned toward me. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice echoing through the hall. "Thank you all for being here tonight. I know you came to celebrate a union, a love story, and what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life." I glanced toward Emma, who was frozen near the edge of the stage, her face a mask of panic. "But it turns out," I continued, my voice growing colder, "this day is a little more complicated than that." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, confusion and curiosity spreading like wildfire. I took a deep breath and dropped the bombshell. "The woman I just married, Emma, has been cheating on me." Gasps erupted, followed by stunned silence. Emma stepped forward, her hands raised in a desperate attempt to stop me. "Noah, please, stop. Don't do this." But I was far past caring about her protests. "And not just with anyone," I added, my voice firm. "She's been having an affair with her sister's husband, Matt." The room exploded. Guests exchanged horrified whispers. Emma's parents looked like they'd been slapped, and Lily, Emma's sister, stood frozen in shock, her face turning a deep shade of red as her gaze darted to Matt, who was standing near the bar, trying to look invisible. "Noah, this isn't the place," Emma begged, her voice breaking. "Please, just let me explain." "Oh, you'll explain," I said, stepping down from the stage and tossing the microphone back to the DJ. "But not to me. We're done, Emma." Lily stormed across the room, her voice rising above the chaos. "Matt, is this true?" Matt stammered, his face a mixture of guilt and terror. "Lily, it's not." "Save it," she spat, her voice trembling with rage. The night spiraled into chaos. Emma's parents tried to calm the guests, but it was useless. People were shouting, pointing fingers, and exchanging scandalized looks. The wedding that was supposed to be a fairy tale had turned into a public nightmare. I didn't stick around to see how it all ended. As Emma dissolved into tears and Lily berated Matt in front of everyone, I walked out of the banquet hall, my heart heavy but my resolve stronger than ever. I climbed into my car, gripping the steering wheel as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. It wasn't the way I'd planned to expose Emma, but it was done. The world knew the truth now, and there was no going back. I drove home in silence, my mind racing but my resolve firm. There was no going back now. The truth was out, and the next step was clear. I needed to finalize my plan and take the evidence to my lawyer. When I reached the apartment, I grabbed the folder of proof I'd been compiling, the messages, the photos, the bank statements, and the video footage, and set it neatly on the kitchen counter. It was everything I needed to ensure Emma walked away with nothing. As I stared at the folder, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the life I thought we were building, and relief that I wasn't blind to her lies any longer. The wedding was over. The marriage was over. Now it was time to take back my future. The morning after the wedding, that wasn't. I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing incessantly. Messages and missed calls flooded in. Friends, family, and even a few acquaintances all wanting to know what had happened. I ignored them all. I had more pressing matters to handle. I poured myself a strong cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the folder of evidence I'd spent weeks compiling. This was my ace in the hole, my armor against the storm Emma had unleashed. By mid-morning, I was sitting in my lawyer's office, the folder resting heavily on my lap. Her name was Rebecca, a no-nonsense attorney recommended by a friend. When I handed her the folder and explained everything, she raised an eyebrow but didn't seem surprised. "You've been thorough," she said, flipping through the contents. "This will make things straightforward." "Straightforward?" I asked, bitterly. "I want her to walk away with nothing." Rebecca nodded, her expression neutral. "Given the circumstances and the evidence you've gathered, she won't have much ground to stand on. Infidelity, misappropriation of joint funds. This is damning, Noah. You'll come out of this clean." The words should have felt like a victory, but they didn't. Not yet. Later that afternoon, I filed for divorce. The process felt surreal, like I was watching it happen to someone else. A part of me still couldn't believe this was my life now. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Rebecca assured me that Emma's behavior would work heavily in my favor. The proof of her week-long escapades, her betrayal with Jake, and of course, the ultimate betrayal with Matt made for an ironclad case. By the time I left her office, the paperwork was filed, and the wheels were officially in motion. Over the next few days, Emma tried to contact me nonstop. Calls, texts, even emails. At first, I ignored them, but as the messages piled up, I couldn't help but glance at a few. "Emma, Noah, please, can we just talk? I made a mistake, but we can fix this. Emma, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. Emma, you're overreacting. You can't just throw everything away because of one bad decision." Each message made my blood boil. One bad decision? She had lied, cheated, and humiliated me in front of everyone we knew. There was no fixing this. Eventually, I replied with a single message. "Me, talk to my lawyer. We're done." A few days later, Emma received the divorce papers. I didn't deliver them myself. I didn't want to see her face. Instead, Rebecca had them sent to her at work, ensuring maximum efficiency and, honestly, a little poetic justice. The fallout was immediate. Emma called me that evening, her voice a mix of anger and desperation. "How could you do this, Noah?" she demanded. "Sending those to my office? Do you know how humiliating that was?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Humiliating? You cheated on me with multiple people, including your sister's husband, Emma. You humiliated yourself." "I didn't cheat," she shouted, her voice cracking. "It wasn't like that." "Save it for the court," I said coldly before hanging up. In the weeks that followed, Emma's life began to unravel. Word of her betrayal spread quickly through our social circles, and even her family started to distance themselves. Lily filed for divorce from Matt, and the two of them became pariahs at every family gathering. Emma's attempts to spin the story in her favor didn't go far. The evidence I'd provided to Rebecca spoke for itself, and when we finally met for the initial settlement discussion, she looked defeated. "You can't leave me with nothing, Noah," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've given so much to this relationship." I leaned back in my chair, staring at her. "What you gave, Emma, was lies and betrayal. You'll get what the law says you're entitled to, and nothing more." She flinched but didn't argue further. She knew the battle was already lost. By the end of the meeting, the terms were set. Emma would leave the apartment within 30 days, with no claim to any joint assets. I was walking away clean, just as Rebecca had promised. As I left the lawyer's office, a strange sense of relief washed over me. The weight of the past few weeks, the lies, the heartbreak, the humiliation, was finally beginning to lift. The divorce wasn't finalized yet, but I knew it was only a matter of time. Emma had played her game, and now she was facing the consequences. It had been weeks since the initial settlement discussion, and I was finally starting to feel like I could breathe again. The apartment felt different without Emma, quieter, lighter. The wounds she left behind were still raw, but knowing the divorce was moving forward gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in a long time. Then, just as I thought the worst was behind me, Emma found a way to drag me back into the chaos. One evening, I got a text from her. I hadn't heard from her since the settlement meeting, and seeing her name pop up on my phone made my chest tighten. "Emma, we need to talk. It's important." I stared at the message for a while, debating whether or not to respond. Against my better judgment, I replied, "Me, talk to my lawyer." Her response came almost immediately. "Emma, Noah, this isn't about the divorce. It's bigger than that. Please, I need to see you." I didn't trust her, but curiosity got the better of me. After a few more back-and-forth messages, I reluctantly agreed to meet her at a nearby coffee shop the next day. When I walked in, Emma was already there, sitting in a corner booth. She looked different, tired, disheveled, like the weight of the past few weeks had finally caught up to her. She gave me a tentative smile as I approached, but I didn't return it. "What's so important?" I asked, keeping my tone cold. She fidgeted with the edge of her coffee cup, avoiding my gaze. "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you this," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I didn't want you to hear it from anyone else." I folded my arms, waiting for her to continue. "I'm pregnant," she said, finally meeting my eyes. The words hit me like a freight train. For a moment, I couldn't speak, couldn't think. Pregnant? After everything she'd done, after everything she put me through, now she was pregnant? I forced myself to take a deep breath, keeping my voice steady. "And you think it's mine?" Emma's eyes widened in shock, like she couldn't believe I'd even ask. "Of course it's yours. Who else would it be?" I let out a bitter laugh. "You really want me to answer that, Emma? Because last I checked, you were cheating on me with at least 2 people. Her expression faltered, guilt flickering across her face. "It's not Jake's," she said quickly, her voice rising in desperation. "And it's definitely not Matt's. I promise, Noah, it's yours." "You'll forgive me if I don't just take your word for it," I said coldly. "If you're so sure, we'll get a DNA test." Emma's lips pressed into a thin line, but she nodded. "Fine. Whatever it takes to prove it to you." Over the next few weeks, Emma continued to insist that the baby was mine. She even tried to use the pregnancy as leverage during our divorce negotiations, claiming she needed additional support for the child. Rebecca, my lawyer, was quick to shut that down. "We'll revisit the issue after the DNA test," she told Emma's lawyer firmly. "Until then, my client isn't obligated to do anything." Emma didn't like that answer, but she didn't have a choice. The day of the test finally arrived. We met at a clinic, where a nurse collected samples from both of us. Emma tried to make small talk in the waiting room, but I shut it down with a single glare. Afterward, it was a waiting game. The results would take a week, and that week felt like an eternity. Part of me dreaded the possibility that the baby might actually be mine. Tying me to Emma forever was the last thing I wanted. But another part of me, the part that knew her too well, suspected the truth would be very different. When the results finally came in, Rebecca called me into her office. She handed me the sealed envelope, her expression neutral. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. I nodded, though my hands were trembling as I tore the envelope open. My eyes scanned the document, zeroing in on the key line. Probability of paternity, 0%. I let out a shaky breath, a mix of relief and anger flooding through me. "It's not mine," I said, my voice almost a whisper. Rebecca gave me a small nod. "I thought as much. This will make things simpler moving forward." Later that day, I sent Emma a copy of the results, along with a short message. "Me, not my baby. Don't contact me again unless it's through my lawyer." Her reply came quickly, filled with apologies and pleas for forgiveness. "Emma, Noah, I didn't know. I thought it was yours. Please, don't hate me. I'm so sorry." But her words meant nothing to me anymore. The damage was done, And this was the final nail in the coffin of whatever we'd once had. The truth was out, and it hit harder than any of Emma's lies ever could. The baby wasn't mine. For a moment, I felt relief wash over me. Relief that I wouldn't be tied to her for the rest of my life. But that relief quickly gave way to anger. How could she lie so convincingly, dragging me through even more chaos after everything she'd already done? Emma tried to call me repeatedly after I sent her the DNA results. I ignored every single attempt. I had nothing more to say to her. My lawyer, Rebecca, assured me that the test results would make the divorce proceedings even more straightforward. Emma couldn't claim anything from me. Not alimony, not support, nothing. She's burned every bridge she had, Rebecca said, closing the file with a satisfied snap. And the court will see that. Word of the pregnancy, and the test results, spread quickly through our social circles. Emma, who had once been the center of attention, found herself completely ostracized. Even her closest friends were distancing themselves, unwilling to associate with her after the scandal. Lily, her sister, had already filed for divorce from Matt. The two of them had become pariahs within the family. At every family event, they were the subject of hushed whispers and judgmental glances. Lily barely acknowledged Emma anymore, furious that her own sister had betrayed her in such an unforgivable way. Emma's parents, once so proud of her, were devastated. Her mother called me once, her voice heavy with sorrow. "Noah," she said, "I'm so sorry for everything she's done to you. This isn't the Emma we raised. I don't know what happened to her." I didn't have the heart to tell her that Emma had likely been this way for a long time. I just hadn't seen it. "Thank you," I said simply, ending the conversation quickly. I wasn't ready to dive back into the wreckage she'd left behind. Emma reached out one final time about a week after the DNA results came in. She showed up at my apartment unannounced, looking worse than I'd ever seen her. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Noah," she said, her voice trembling as she stood in the doorway. "Can we talk? Please." I didn't want to let her in, but part of me wanted closure. Reluctantly, I stepped aside and let her into the living room. She sat on the couch, the same couch where I'd seen her with Jake in the camera footage weeks ago. The memory made my stomach churn, but I didn't let it show. "What do you want, Emma?" I asked, keeping my tone cold. She burst into tears, burying her face in her hands. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I've ruined everything. I've lost you, my family, my friends, everything." I crossed my arms, unmoved. "What did you think was going to happen, Emma? That I'd just forget everything you've done? That we'd somehow go back to the way things were?" "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought the baby was yours, Noah. I really did. I just made so many mistakes." I shook my head, cutting her off. "Mistakes? Emma, mistakes are forgetting to pay a bill or leaving the stove on. What you did wasn't a mistake. It was a series of deliberate choices. Choices that hurt me, your sister, and your family." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with desperation. "Can't we start over? Please? I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." I let out a bitter laugh. "There's no making it right, Emma. This is done. You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences. I'm done being a part of your mess." She cried harder, but I didn't stay to watch. I stood, walked to the door, and opened it. "Goodbye, Emma." She looked at me one last time, her face crumpling in defeat, before she stood and walked out of my life for good. With Emma gone, I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in months, I could see a future for myself, one where I wasn't weighed down by her lies and betrayal. The divorce was finalized shortly after, and with the DNA results, Emma had no claim to anything. She left with nothing. I heard through mutual friends that Emma eventually moved out of town. She was still pregnant, though she never revealed who the father was. Matt and Lily's divorce was finalized not long after mine, and Matt's reputation was in ruins. It's been a year since the chaos ended, and I can finally say I've moved on. Looking back now, I realize that Emma's betrayal, as devastating as it was, didn't break me. It rebuilt me. In the months after the divorce, I focused on picking up the pieces of my life. I threw myself into work, reconnecting with projects I'd neglected during the whirlwind of my relationship. I also started therapy, something I'd never considered before, but it turned out to be one of the best decisions I've ever made. Talking to someone about the betrayal, the anger, and the self-doubt helped me let go of the weight I'd been carrying. One thing I learned in therapy was that Emma's choices weren't a reflection of my worth. I spent so much time wondering if I hadn't been enough. If I'd been a better husband, would she have stayed loyal? But the truth is, her actions were about her, not me. In time, I started rebuilding my social circle, reconnecting with old friends and making new ones. For so long, I'd been isolated, trapped in a relationship that I thought was a partnership but was really a one-sided performance. Now, I had the freedom to be myself again. My family and friends were my rock through it all. My parents, who were heartbroken for me, never once said, "I told you so," even though I'm sure they had their suspicions about Emma long before I did. My best friend, Chris, dragged me out of the house when I wanted to sulk, forcing me to rejoin the world, whether I felt ready or not. Emma, on the other hand, faded into the background. I heard from mutual acquaintances that she moved to another state shortly after the divorce was finalized. The last I heard, she had the baby, though no one seemed to know who the father was. Her family had distanced themselves from her, and her social circle had all but evaporated. There was a time when I would have felt satisfaction at the thought of her struggling, but now, I just feel indifferent. She made her choices, and she's living with them. That's not my burden to carry anymore. The biggest change, though, is how I view myself. I'm stronger now, more resilient. I've learned to trust my instincts, to set boundaries, and to value myself in ways I never did before. Recently, I started dating again. It's nothing serious yet, but it feels good to open my heart again, even just a little. The fear of being betrayed again is still there, but it doesn't control me. I know now that I can survive anything. If there's one thing I've taken away from this whole experience, it's this. You can't control what other people do, but you can control how you respond. Emma's betrayal was a wake-up call, a painful reminder that blind trust isn't the same as love. But it was also the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where I get to decide what my life looks like, free from lies and manipulation. For anyone reading this who's been through something similar, it gets better. The pain doesn't last forever, and one day, you'll look back and realize that what felt like the end was really just the beginning. As for me, I'm ready for whatever comes next. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in Noah's situation when Emma proposed the open week? Would you have agreed or ended things right there? If you like this story, subscribe to the channel and give us a like.